Good afternoon. I'm Crimson from Shine a Light in the Dark, and we have the amazing JP Anderson from Rabbit Junk with us today, and he is going to give us a little moonlight this evening. So, JP, it's been a while since we last spoke, and you've even released your new album since then. How is that going?
Apocalypse for Beginners. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was released that was October of last year, and yeah, I think it's probably the most well received album the Rabbit Junk has ever put out. It debuted at number two on Bandcamp, and it made some other charts. I'm really happy with how it worked out. And we've just started playing those some of those tracks live this year, and they're really fun to play live. So yeah, I'm stoked. I'm stoked. That album was really really hard to put together. I had just moved. I just started a new job, and I really wanted to put this album out. I think I did the whole album in like 9 weeks, I think, or something like
Oh
that.
my gosh.
Just
Really?
yeah, just totally brutalized myself. So it's nice when you work really hard and then it kind of works out. You're like, well, okay, that was worth it. Because there's a lot of sacrifices when you're working like 15 hours a day
Oh
in
my
your little
gosh.
cage studio. So yeah.
Number one, I don't know how you did that, but congratulations because the album's absolutely amazing. And it really is kind of like this survival guide to this kind of new apocalyptic era that we've been living in. So I truly love it. I've got to say, Nostromo, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, one of my
You are,
favorite
yeah.
songs. I love it.
I think that's my favorite too. I think the what is it, a metaphor or an allegory or whatever. I mean, I'm trying that, this image of like, being in the spaceship from the first Alien movie and sleepwalking as you're kind of like going down these corridors, you're sleepwalking, and then you're kind of waking up and realizing, oh shit, there's like, a monster right behind me. That image really captures a it does a good job of explaining like my emotional and mental state for a lot of my life, which is just kind of going through the motions and then kind of waking up being like, oh my God, this is so not where I want to be, or I am not being treated well, or something like that. So that was a very from the heart song, but I didn't know how to describe that experience in a direct way. So I had to use this kind of this metaphorical way of doing, I guess. And the Alien and Aliens are just movies from my youth that had a huge impact. They actually scared the living shit out of me is what they did. But then as I got older, they became these weird comfort movies. Like the thing that had once terrified me, now I have this weird rapport with the H.R. Giger alien where I see it and I'm like, oh, it's like my
Right.
buddy.
Yeah, you're really cute.
Yeah, in this weird way. It's I got an alien plushie around here somewhere. I'm like one of those people.
No, I love aliens. I really do. Are you an aliens or a predator person? Because there's normally like no both. They're normally like either picking one.
Oh, I don't think you need to pick and choose. I think the original Schwarzenegger Alien, or I mean, Predator movie was brilliant. So
Love
simple,
it.
just a really simple story. Like you just plop these a collection of badasses in the middle of the jungle. They each get killed one by one. It's great. I mean, just they didn't try and over explain anything, and
That's true.
so totally works for me. I'm also a big fan of the soundtrack of the original Predator movie. I think it's Alan Silvestri, maybe, and I actually borrowed a lot of the composition from the first Predator movie and put it into uh, the Rabbit Junk track "From the Stars."
Oh,
There's like
okay.
a direct borrowing from that soundtrack. I just I changed the
Oh, I
notes, I
love
changed
that.
the rhythm a little bit, but that was basically the inspiration for that song. For the orchestral part of that song was the soundtrack for Predator. So
Oh
see
my
what
gosh.
a huge nerd I am. It's
You know what's lovely about that? I will never watch that movie the same now, and I will not be able to hear those songs the same now. Like they'll
yeah.
run together forever for me.
Yeah.
But I love it. Um, so like I love how you talked about though a minute ago you said that you didn't have the words to like express it directly, and so you did it through music. And that's beautiful because like one of the things I've always really enjoyed about your music is you do a fantastic job of creating this whole other world. Like and you allow even the listener to kind of go into that world with you. I'm kind of curious like what helps you make that world?
Oh well, thank you for saying all that. I think what's going on in the studios. I'm mostly talking to myself. I think music is this. I'm trying to figure out like what is going on with me. There's a lot happening. My inner world is a complicated place, and so the creative process is a way that I just clarify what's happening. But knowing that someone's going to hear the thing I'm doing is somehow that's really crucial to the process. The sort of therapeutic benefit I get from music wouldn't exist if I didn't think that there was going to be a listener. And I also, God, what's happening in the studio is really complicated. I guess I'm trying to clarify my inner world. I'm speaking to myself. Sometimes I don't even know what I've just said to myself until I listen to a song many years later, and I listen to it and I'm like, oh man, that was boy, yeah, you were really trying to alert yourself to some issue in your life. But I like writing the lyrics in a way that invites interpretation. The person on the other side of this is going to be listening to it, and I want those lyrics to be able to fit to their life as well. So it's a really strange process, right? I'm like talking to myself and I'm kind of like inviting a conversation or participation of the listener at the same
Yeah.
time. And that's what, and that those things in combination, for some reason, that's what the therapeutic benefit I get from it is. It's like, I think it's maybe I'm connecting with myself, and then I'm imagining connecting with someone else. I'm bringing those two things together, and that is healing. If I was
Yeah.
just talking to myself, or if I was just delivering something that had nothing really to do with myself in an intimate way, if I was just kind of like delivering just music that wasn't vulnerable or exposing myself, I don't think I get the healing out of it. And the role that music has played during my entire life is that I think I've said things like it keeps me sane, or it's grounding. I mean, it just does. It's so much. I don't think I'd be here. It's really sad to say, but I don't think I would have made it without music. I think I am definitely one of those people. So it's so not optional. I mean, I've got to keep doing it. People are like, "Wow, you've been doing this for so long. You're still so productive. Like, what's driving that?" And I'm like, "It's how I cope."
Yeah.
I've tried. I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll take a break from it for 3 months. And I just steadily decline. I decompensate. So something pretty serious is happening for me in the studio.
You will know, I actually think it's beautiful because I remember one of the first times we talked, you told me like I just want to create something real. And then listening to you talk is kind of like is exactly what you're doing is you're trying to create this real raw experience between you and your listeners, which is so important because right now in this world a lot of us feel so alone in a world that is almost determined to misunderstand us and to
Mm.
feel misunderstood. And you're creating this world for them to where like you're going in as this raw version, like saying, hey, here, I'm being raw, meet me here. I know that you may not have the words to say it, but let's try to say it and fit it and work it together. And so that's
Yeah,
absolutely beautiful.
that's a really great way of putting it. I think you just described it really accurately. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I never, I make all my music alone mostly. I mean, uh, some girl and I will collaborate on a few tracks, but a lot of it is just me. And it's interesting. I never feel lonely ever when I'm doing that process. I'm never like, oh, I wish somebody was here, because I think people are here with me. I think I have like fans that I've met over the years are kind of with me, or almost sometimes I'm with I'm simultaneously with different versions of myself. I guess I never really feel alone, even though it's a really solitary process.
Yeah. Well, that's well, kind of like you said too, like with music, you almost said that, you don't know if you'd be here without music, which almost says like music itself is almost like a person, if you think about it, right? Like I'm one of those
Mm.
people too that I feel like growing up like in and out of foster care and stuff, I was always misunderstood, but music was the one place that I wasn't misunderstood, right? Like it was that
Mm.
one place that even though the world was kind of telling me something, I was able to be safe and not judged. And I think it's beautiful, like, especially like listening to your music. Like, I feel like I can go into that world still to this day. Like, for my, as a therapist, right? I stay in a lot of dark places a lot, right? And so your music kind of really even helps me go to another world where I can escape kind of that part that's really hard. Um, but I am kind of curious to know because I know we've talked a little bit about past before. And so I want to take a little bit of a different turn because I think that your story is just so important to be able to guide and help people that maybe came from similar situations from as you did. So I'm kind of curious to know what made this kind of badass rock star. I mean, you're not only the vocals and the guitar, the drums, the producer, but you're also a professor. And I think
Yeah,
San Diego, right? Like for
yeah, yeah,
social,
yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm
like,
a professor of political science at San Diego State University, and I teach law classes, law and politics classes. Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really weird. I didn't see that coming. My whole life story is just a whole all these twists and turns. Um, I can briefly cover that. Uh, sure, yeah, I mean, because it is weird. Like, how did that turn out? That was definitely not a plan. I never planned to be an academic. I never planned to be Professor Anderson. And I struggle with that identity, to be honest. Sometimes I'm up in front of that classroom and I'm like, is this even me? Like, I just, I guess, I mean, they can sometimes they can call that like imposter syndrome, but I feel like it's a little bit of a deeper thing for me. Um, but I did not complete high school. I very quietly quit high school when I was 17. Very just quietly dropped out. There was no like big declaration or anything like that. I mean, I just literally kind of stopped showing up. Uh, um, my parents did not live together at that point. Actually, they were divorced at that point. My parents are interesting people. They got divorced when I was 4. They got remarried when I was 20. so
okay.
so then when I was 17, they were divorced. So they were living apart. I was just living with my mom. She was going through a lot, so she didn't really notice that I stopped going to high school. She assumed that I graduated, and everybody assumed that I graduated. I started working in mostly social service jobs because they were flexible. They paid a little bit more than food service jobs. And it was really hard to get a job as a bartender at the time. And also, I was underage, right? So, I mean, that's part of it,
Yeah.
But you don't have a high school education. You're kind of looking at the service industry or the social service industry, I think. In Seattle, I was living in Seattle at the time. So I'm not the construction type. I don't have like a lot of muscles or anything like that. I haven't got that sort of shit to trade. I got maybe people skills, so so I just
You have
follow that.
amazing people skills, and you've got,
But by the time that I stopped going to high school, I had already decided I wanted to do music as a full time career. And did I know how to do that? No. Did I have any guidance or did I have any real actionable information? Zero. I just was like, this is what I want to do. I started playing guitar when I was 14, fairly late. I idolized some metal bands. I thought they probably had nicer lives than they really did, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that. I was playing in a bunch of bands around Seattle. All my bandmates were a decade older than I was, so I started playing shows at 15, and so I think I was struggling in high school. I think I'm really neurodivergent. I think I'm a total brain weirdo. My brain doesn't work like this society has been. We live in a society that has been created for a particular kind of brain. I definitely don't have
yeah.
that sort of. This is why I over-explain things, and why if you get
Well,
emails from me, they're full of
I love it.
parentheses.
I love it
So
because I do too. So I
yeah,
totally
yeah.
get you.
I mean, probably ADHD, or maybe I'm like a little autistic, or I don't something is weird about me. And so I was a terrible student. I just couldn't get my homework done, and I couldn't concentrate, and I couldn't absorb anything. um, yeah, I've read nonfiction voraciously. I had this massive store of knowledge. It just wasn't the knowledge that the high school wanted me to have. So I mean, I
Yeah.
just quietly quit at 17. I just started working, and I spent just a little bit over a decade working in social services while I was trying to get my music career off the ground. And I mean, and a lot of things happened in that 10 years. I was signed to labels. I went on a few tours. I released, four Rab Junk albums. The music industry was going through this massive transition away from CDs to MP3s, but then away from MP3s to streaming. And it was a really difficult time to be a musician because there wasn't a real easy avenue to make money. So I was really, really broke. Um, and I got married really young. Got married at 20 to some girl, and who I forced to be in Rabbit Junk, or I basically cajoled her into it. Nothing she wanted to do. I was just like, I really hear female vocals. I really hear um, kind of a plural queer sound here. I want there to be pink. I want it to be this blend of masculinity and femininity. I want it to be kind of gender fluid, you know. And so
Yeah.
I need a female presence. And you're the only person I know. You're the only girl I know. Some girls. I was quite like that, but so I cajoled her into it. So, um, uh, and yeah, I mean, it wasn't very successful those 10 years. I was very broke, and I was working really dead end, kind of dangerous jobs. I worked in a homeless shelter for 5 years, and almost, you know, got my ass handed to me a number of times by it's a you know, unfortunately, homeless shelters tend to be violent places, and when you work in them, you're just rolling the dice every day. Is today going to be my day that someone's going to attack me with a hypodermic needle, or you know, something else? I mean, that happened to me. So
Yeah. Oh
you
my
know,
gosh. So that's a true
yeah,
story.
that was bad. But I worked there because it was very flexible. I could leave for 2 months to go on tour, and they couldn't wait to have me back because nobody wants to work in a homeless shelter. And they paid whatever, it was like $11.60 an hour, which for some reason I was like, oh, that's a good rate. I mean, just, you know. But by the time I was 29, Jen and I had our first kid, and I was like, my life is this is not working. I'm making very little money. I can't support a family. Um, I tried to. I worked briefly in an administrative position at the homeless shelter, thinking, well, maybe I'm just going to do this, but more serious, you know. So I was like
Yeah.
a assistant director type thing at the homeless shelter. That was really, really terrible at that. All of my neurodivergence was just working against me because that's a lot of like administrative organization, kind of being a
Oh yeah.
secretary kind of role, and like I just suck so bad at anything even close to that. So just don't ever rely on me to keep the schedule, remember dates, who's got time off. Oh my god, total disaster. So within 3 months, it was a total crash and burn. Um, and I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go back to school. So I enrolled in community college. Within a quarter, I got my GED, and then and then I thought maybe that was going to be it, but then I had really good teachers. They saw something in me. The experience was different. Like something had changed in my brain. I was able to do homework and I was able to write assignments. So I'm not sure what happened. I was 29 at this point, and I was like, okay, I can. School seems pretty easy, so I'm just going to keep on doing it. And it wasn't taking up that much time. So you know, so I got an associate's degree, so that's a 2-year degree, and then that was the last year that there was a direct transfer from community college to the University of Washington.
Yeah.
After that year, there was no longer direct transfer. You had to apply to the University of Washington. So I didn't apply. I just was automatically in, and and so I was just like, okay, I guess I'm just going to keep doing this. No plan, no idea what I was going to study. Just getting just that there's that sleepwalking thing, right? Sleepwalking and
Yeah.
like, I don't know what I'm doing. I guess I'm just going to do this. Like, no fucking plan. And I got a letter from UW on the first day that said, congratulations, we're giving you a full ride scholarship. You're not going
Oh
to
my
pay any
gosh.
tuition. Also, here's $500 a month directly deposited into your account. You know, I tried to get a hold of somebody and I'm like, why? There's no explanation. You know, you don't tell me I didn't do anything, you know? And they're like, well, we just reviewed your file and it's, you know, and so I think they called it the Husky Promise or something like that. And I was an incredibly fortunate recipient of this thing that the University of Washington does for like lost causes like me. I think you know, I was a high school dropout. My mom's a high school dropout. Um, and I think it was just like some sort of pity, whatever. I fucking took it. I was like, that's great. You know, no tuition. It was mainly also it was $500 a month, which felt like an important piece of a chunk of change. And they also gave me and my family health insurance. I mean, it was just
Oh
like,
my gosh, that's
so I
awesome.
just stayed in school because I was like, I don't even know where else to go and get these things.
Yeah.
And 2 years passed by real fast. All of a sudden, I was graduating. I had participated in some sort of this program or this degree program called Law, Societies, and Justice. Why? I don't know. Maybe I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I don't know. What was that? What was that program even about? I'm not sure. It's just a big scattershot of sociology and legal studies. You know, what was it really preparing me for? No idea. You know, and I was getting towards graduating, and I went to sit down with a professor, and I said, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Am I going to go to law school? Um, I feel like if I just graduate with my 4-year degree, I'm just going to go right back to working at the homeless shelter because I don't even know what I've been trained to do. I've basically been here because of insurance and getting $500 a month to stay. And he said, and his name's Michael McCann, and he's actually turns out he's a huge big shot in his research field. He's one of
Oh,
the top
awesome.
scholars in the world. I had no idea who I was talking to. I mean, he just seemed like a really nice guy. And he said, well, JP, he's like, I think you could go to law school. He's like, I think that you would succeed, but I think you'd be miserable because you're kind of philosophical, you're sort of creative, and that's just law school is not going to be the right place for you because that's really just being kind of cold and analytical. That's how you be a good lawyer. He's like, I think you should go and get your PhD. And I was like, I don't know anything about getting a PhD. I also don't want to pay tuition. And he said, no, no, no. He said, when you get a PhD, when you're in a PhD program, we pay you. We pay you a stipend. It's not very much. It's like $22,000 a year and you get health insurance. And I was like, sign me up. How do I do that? Because
Right?
my capacity for making money was so shitty that $22,000 a year was like an income bump. Like big time. I was like,
Yeah.
sweet. I've never made $22,000 a year before. And so he said, well, I have to give you a letter of recommendation, but I'm willing to do that. And he's like, you should start applying to grad schools. I applied to one grad school at the University of Washington. They had a 6% acceptance rate. And I think because of Michael, I got in. I think because Michael was also a musician and he was kind of an academic outsider. And he liked to bring people into the program that he just thought were a little kooky, a little bit different, right? He wanted to see what kind of research was made. If you bring unlikely people into a political science graduate program, he's like, what's going to happen? So there's me and a couple other people who were just these kind of misfits. So, and just I know I feel like I'm giving way too much information, so I'm just going to skip ahead. Like 7 years goes by. Getting a PhD takes a really long time, 7 to 8 years. So
Yeah.
7 years goes by. I'm about ready to graduate with a PhD. I'm thinking to myself, I don't really know. Like it has been cool. Like it was like the best part-time job a musician could have would be grad school. I highly recommend it. Um, you teach one class. It's teaching comes very naturally to me, so it was not scary, not a big deal. I connect really
Yeah.
easily with students. And you get health insurance, you get a stipend. Everybody thinks you're doing something amazing. They're like, "Oh, you're in grad school? Whoa!" So you feel like a legitimate human being, even though you're just a scuzzball musician, And so it was great. I was able to I was like undercover, and the whole time I'm doing music. And during grad school, that's when Rabbit Junk really blew up and turned into like a
Well, that's like
proper.
rabbit out of hiding, right? Almost like you're
Yeah,
writing
100%.
at
Oh
that
no,
point.
you nailed it. Yeah, 100%. That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was like the last few years of grad school. I was like, wow, I'm making like for real, not bad money. Um, I mean, I'm making like, $60,000, $70,000 a year from music. Who would have thought? That's all because of streaming. That's all because of Spotify gets shit on because they don't pay artists enough. But Spotify was saving my ass. It was the most consistent paycheck I'd ever seen from music. Two, 3,000, $3,500 a month just from Spotify. And then so, and consistent, like just month after month after month. I mean, you can start to build a life around that sort of income. You can start thinking
Yeah.
to yourself, like, hey, I'm a professional musician. I like pay my rent, with music. Um, so I thought, maybe I'm just going to walk away from academia. I really love music. That's really what I want to do. I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to take the risk because things are going pretty well right now.
Yeah.
But, I had written this dissertation, which is what you have to do to get a PhD. And my dissertation committee were really wonderful people. They had worked really hard to help me develop this research. And I felt like if I didn't apply for at least a few academic jobs, that I would be letting these people down. So I was like, okay, I'll put myself out there. I'm not going to apply to very many. I think I applied to 7 or something like that with zero expectation that I
Yeah.
would get off an academic job because only 1 in 10 PhDs become professors. They're really, really hard to get. They're very, very competitive. They don't pay very well. So they're super competitive and they don't pay very well. So there's
Yeah.
attrition. There's people leaving, people who don't want to go into academia because they actually want to make money. And then also the people who are left over, they're all just competing for these scraps, right? So
Yeah.
basically, I applied for a few jobs and San Diego State University got back to me and I did an interview and I said everything I'm saying right now, I said in that interview. I was so straight up with them, 100%. I was like, hey, look, I'm not even sure if I'm going into academia. I got this other career that I'm really curious about. I'm not sure. I was trying to be just transparent as possible. I didn't want them to feel duped, or like, I wasn't trying to get the job. I was just like, here's JP, whatever.
Yeah.
They decided to offer me the job. and it was a total crisis for Jen and I. We were living in Seattle and then moving down to San Diego. We had a lot of social capital in Seattle, community people that we love, we had to leave them. But, I think that when I was looking at the finances, I'm like, we have two kids now at this point, one's going to be going off to college in 3 years. And one thing that San Diego State offers is your family members can basically go to any of the state schools in California
Oh,
for
that's
like
awesome.
80 or 90% off. It's
That's
like one
awesome.
of the benefits they offer. So I was like, wow, we haven't saved anything for our kids' um, college. We have like no savings. We
Yeah.
don't own a home. I mean, we've been broke. My Jen's was a social worker, and she's a psychologist. She has a private practice, but neither one of us have been making any money for most of our lives. Right? So we're broke people. How are we going to send the kids to college, or at least give them that option? Because I'm so taking the job was one way to do that. So it was a hard decision, but I ended up saying yes. So then I'm about to go into my third year of teaching now. Actually, just before this interview, I was like setting up my classes and sending
Oh,
my welcome email, like, I'm Professor Anderson. Welcome to Political Science 346, Law and Politics. So
when you say that though, it always makes me think of Mr. Anderson from The Matrix. I'm sorry.
Mr. Anderson, my
But,
name is Neo.
right. I'm totally I love it. But I did want to point something out just because I think it's so important. Like you said, like that was a 1 in 10 shot, and then like you didn't graduate high school, your family didn't graduate from high school, and like the whole time though, you're like, I'm just JP, like, but I don't think you also like. Same token, like I just want to say how badass I think you are because I don't even think you realize how badass you are. Like when you're saying that, because there's
Oh,
almost like this part that's like, and the only reason I say this is because I feel it too. Like I was the first person in my family to ever graduate from anything, and when I graduated, I was like, oh yay, I'm the first person in my family that did this, not even realizing that I didn't take in my own accomplishment. Right, like I was taking part of the pain from my family's
mhm.
life into mine and not even accepting my
Yeah,
ability to do something. And that's another thing I want to tell you too is that a part of even why I'm able to do this is because of you, right? Like you were a huge inspiration to me last time we spoke about getting out of my shell and being that rabbit out of hiding, right? Because I technically think of you like like in my phone, like you're like Alice in Wonderland, like the white rabbit, like pull the white rabbit out of the hat. You're totally like the white rabbit coming out of the hat. And apparently that rabbit learned how to get his own hat, right? And then he's pulling out all of his own tricks.
yeah.
Love it.
Well, I really appreciate hearing that. You're right. You're 100% right. It feels really awkward to share our life stories, but if we don't, then there's somebody else out there who maybe is just wondering what's possible, and we only know what's possible when we hear what's happened. And so, yeah, you're 100% right.
Well, think about it.
And I don't know why it's so I don't know why it's so hard to feel this kind of like sense of accomplishment or something like that. I guess the way it felt the whole time is that I just kept walking into stuff. It's weird. There's this current that was taking me in this direction of academia, and I just fell into it. And I know people who they really want to do this job. It's like their life dream, but the current's working against them. It's really weird how life works like that. So it's like almost like I was fated to get here. So that the reason why I don't feel like a big sense of accomplishment is because I'm not sure really what I did besides kind of showing up. I don't really know what I did to make any of it happen. I know people who have worked 10 times as hard as I have, and it won't happen for them. It's really strange. And I feel a little bit in the reverse with music, where music has been the thing that I've always wanted to do. And
Yeah.
it's been really hard. Success has not come my way. It has not been automatic, not even close. There's line um, um, and I know other people where they're like, yeah, I like making songs, I like music, but it's not really me or something like that. And their careers have been like blast off. So life is cruel that way. Like our devotions to things, our desires for things don't necessarily match up with our opportunities or what happens. There's just so much about our life that's out of our control. So where we end up is uh, it's a conspiracy of forces that we can't control. I think is what I'm trying to say. I'm just being long winded about it. So If I really
No,
thought that I could control my life, if I thought like, oh yeah, there's like all these inflection points and I just continually made the best choice every single time, then I'd be like, I'm a badass. But the thing is, I didn't really make very good choices or very informed choices. I just like I've been driven by a lot of like anxiety and I rush at things. I have a lot of character deficits, and despite those character deficits, things have worked out pretty well for me. But really, it's like despite. How much credit can I really take? You know what I'm saying? Like,
but think of how empowering that story is, though, right? Like, think about who's listening to this or even who's listening to your music, and they're like, oh my gosh, I think he's awesome. And then they hear you come out with what you feel like are your character defects, and they're like, oh my gosh, like if he feels that way, this person that I look up to feels that way and has these things, then maybe I can do that too. Like it
yeah,
almost gives that like think about it as a kid, like if you're sitting there listening to your favorite artist and then all of a sudden they have a very similar story to you and you're like, oh my gosh, like I really actually could do this too. Because the thing is, like you said, you came from nothing and made something, right? And a lot of times people are like, oh, well, it was just handed to them or it was just given to them, right? And so they don't see the fight in between. And that fight is half of what gives us courage. Like even what you mentioned earlier, like when you're talking about your bad things, like neurodeficit, like you know, like neurodivergent and things like that, that's actually become your superpower. If you think about it, that is your superpower when you're writing music and when you're connecting with people. And what makes it so beautiful is that everything that the world tried to tell us was a flaw was actually normally and justly kind of like what makes us beautiful. And you said like with social justice you didn't know like which way you were going, but I remember in an earlier interview when you were with the Shizit, right? Like a lot of that
yeah,
became your way of transmuting pain for injustices. So kind of like that always that passion, kind of like what I've sensed, and completely tell me if I'm wrong, but you've always kind of had that passion for that social justice and to help people elevate themselves and kind of outcry against what you felt like was wrong. And even with the apocalypse, like a lot of them, like Nostromo's, is kind of like people wake up, like you're sleepwalking through
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's you're 100% right. That album is actually so complicated because every single song is simultaneously something personal and then something social going on, like in parallel. Every single song. I'm not even meaning to do it. It's just exactly that's it. Like it's Nostromo is like JP, you need to wake up, man. Like you've got to be more intentional about how you live your life. It's also like, hey, society, we've got to wake up. We have to be more intentional. We were just putting one foot in front of the other, just doing the same old thing. And look what we're doing. We're giving birth to an apocalypse. This is not it's not a good look. Future
Yeah,
generations are going to look back and be like, "What the fuck was up with those people? Why did they just let that happen?" There's like a slow
right.
motion car
What
crash
they said.
happening. They did nothing. So yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I totally concede. Actually, everything you said before that is 100% accurate as well. I'm not quite there yet in my description of myself, but maybe I'll get there.
Well, no,
So,
I think that it helps. Like, I think that we see ourselves as different versions, right? Like, it's funny because other people can generally see the beauty in us, but then, like, we see kind of our flaws, right? And I used to think that, like, kind of my flaw was is I'm just too much or I'm too extra or but what's funny is like even in therapy, right? It's my quirky personality that my clients actually like. And when I try to be like Miss Perfect, my clients are like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, okay, yeah,
I
I
don't
get it.
think
I can't be perfect.
people
But
really respond if you're down to earth and vulnerable. It's just like universally people respond really well to that. So I get really good feedback scores on my teaching. Yeah, like I think you get a score of like 1 to 5, and I'm usually at 5 or something like that. And so, um, and people are like, "What's your secret? What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I don't have a plan. I just go in there and I just try and be really down to earth and vulnerable with my students, and that just they I think they find it really refreshing, basically, because there's so many other professors who are like just lording over them, like, well, I'm Dr. Anderson, and I am such a goddamn expert on everything.
right?
And that's that gets really grindy after a while. You know what I mean? Like nobody. We don't live in a society where being doctor. Nobody gives a shit if I'm Dr. Anderson. They actually care way more if I'm nice. That's way more
Yeah.
important. 100% more important, right? That
Yeah.
gets way more traction in society. Just like being nice and just being real with people. Um, and
What's
so. I hope that the academic community starts to realize that they're damaging rapport with students by overemphasizing their expertise and their authority and their credentials. Nobody
Yeah.
cares.
No, no, I completely agree. And what I actually think was pretty cool about what you said about that too, about going in there and not having a plan, right? That's actually what allows it to be more beautiful. Because if I have a plan, then that means I have to meet an agenda, right? But if I
Yeah.
don't have a plan and I just go authentically as me, then I actually just allow whatever is to happen and I'm actually involved in a conversation with you. Not like, oh no, let me meet step one, two, three, and four.
Yeah. I know. I guess I should clarify. I mean, I don't have a plan in terms of how I'm going to connect with students. I don't have like a
Oh yeah, no.
strategy or a tactic, right? Right. I do, I probably put too much time actually planning the topics that we're going to cover in the
Oh
lecture
yeah,
and
for sure.
you know what I mean? And I mean, I need to put less time into that actually, because when you're an academic, 1/3 of your job is teaching. Most of what you're doing is research. That's where you're meant to be really putting all of your time and energy. I have to like publish a damn article every year. And publishing articles in academic journals is brutal. It's like a peer review process. You write this big article, you send it off, and typically somebody gets back to you and they're like, it's not very good. And here's 15 reasons why. And then and maybe you get a chance to revise, but a lot of times they just straight up reject you. So you have to like pass
Oh
that
no.
on. So that's mainly what I'm meant to be doing. I probably put too much time into actually planning teaching. But in terms of like, how do you connect with people? Don't have a plan there. Just be real. Like, and not everybody's gonna like you too, man. You just gotta rub. There's always gonna be some person who's like, I don't like that person. you know?
That is
Some.
fair.
Oh, there's a room full of people. There's gonna be. It's inevitable. There is someone who doesn't like you. That's okay. They're on their journey. You don't need to mutually dislike them back. You can still kind of respect their humanity, and you're just not their flavor. That's all.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned that because it's true. Like when you're being, there are going to be people who don't like you,
Yeah.
and that's okay because they don't have to. What's funny about like wearing masks, right? Like we don't realize if we wear a mask and we meet people wearing a mask that we feel rejected when we're our authentic self because the fact that we were wearing the mask is now meeting authenticity and they didn't agree to be friends. And so we
Yeah.
feel
I like that.
rejected,
Yeah.
like all of a sudden we're like, no, you're rejecting me for who I am. And it's like, no, you're actually rejecting me because you're not who you said you were. Because if you're
Yeah.
authentic means you're authentic, then you actually paired right. But if a mask and an authentic, they don't go,
Yeah. That's right.
right?
That's, yeah. So
If that makes sense. Sorry, I
it
over
does.
explain things too.
No, it doesn't make sense. Oh my god, I'm the biggest over explainer that's ever lived. I can't. I mean, I can't. It's like irresponsible to put me in a classroom. Oh my god, I give students way more information than they could possibly absorb. I'm lecturing them like, I'm just gonna stop. I am so sorry. The last 10 minutes was extraneous tributary information that you don't need. I just stole 10 minutes away from you. I'm sorry. I'm just like that. It's just blah, 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 blah. And some
No,
things, I think it's a
no.
inability to understand what's really important. Like everything's like I got that kind of ADHD quality. I'm like everything's important. Every aspect of 1859 constitutional law needs to be discussed, which is a shitload of stuff. And so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, if you think about it, what you're doing is you're just giving them I like, because I'm the same way. So I've come to this conclusion. I'm like, I'm just giving you enough information so that when I'm not there, you can figure it out for yourself too. So
You're gonna
it's
have
like
to
if you
disentangle
overload,
this knotty web of information later on your own. Yeah.
exactly. I've got to make sure that by the time I'm done with this conversation, you are a master. You are a master of this
Yes.
topic.
Yes. Oh
Oh,
my God. I feel so much responsibility to make every single one of my students, an expert. I have to remind myself, I'm like, they don't need to be an expert on constitutional law. Most of my students are taking constitutional law because it's a general education requirement. They don't, they're curious. They're like, I want to know a little bit about the Constitution. They don't need to know everything, so I think I'm getting better. I think I'm growing as an instructor where I'm like not overloading my students, but that's definitely been an issue that I've had.
you've got
They're all
this.
really sweet about it though. Nobody ever said, no, I never get bad feedback about that. I mean, they're always really nice about it. But I know I'm doing it. I can see on their face. They're like, oh my God, I can't take anymore.
What's funny though is like I think that sometimes even with myself, when I see that, like I still don't know how to stop. I'm like, okay, Tasha, stop. Like don't, and then I still keep. you
It's
know.
so hard because doesn't it feel so important? The thing that you were describing is just like this seems so important. It's also really really important that I give the best possible explanation, the clearest possible explanation. These are all like
Exactly.
completely misguided points of view. You know, it's probably not important, and there is no perfect explanation. So just like so,
You know
maybe
what's
what's driving all that is anxiety. You know, maybe that's
right?
just like an anxiety response.
Well, I was going to say, and maybe it's a fear response, right? Because remember how I was talking about we're living in a world that's almost determined to misunderstand us. When you come from being misunderstood all the time, you begin to over explain so that you aren't misunderstood anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially like
yeah.
you get a lot of conflict. You're like, no, that wasn't my intention. Like, and I feel like too, like in today's society, when you come at people with a very authentic personality, it's hard for them to trust that. And so it's almost like they're like, what's
No.
your ulterior motive?
Oh, I
Like,
know people are really suspicious. Yeah,
exactly.
overly suspicious. There, that's really sad because I mean, that's just like there's so many of us who are walking around with this like buffer field of suspicion, and I'm not going to let anybody in. I'm not going to let anybody hurt me. And that's when you're walking around life feeling that self-protective. I think what's really going on is that you don't trust yourself. You don't trust yourself to have good boundaries. You don't trust yourself to be able to assertively defend yourself against attacks or abuse. You know, like I think that I think people are that sense of vulnerability it's from there's like low self-esteem involved in that sense of vulnerability. Like I can't defend myself, so I have to like put up this fortress.
Yeah.
I think that you can defend yourself. You can't. It's like you can draw boundaries. Wait for the boundaries to be crossed. You know, don't like preemptively draw the boundaries with people. It's not necessary. You know, you're just like you're shutting out potentially really nice people. Is one thing I
Yeah.
think. So you
I have
know.
totally been guilty of those preemptive strikes of boundaries sometimes.
Yeah.
Totally guilty of them.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
as I've grown more as a person, I've gotten to where I'm like, you know what? No, I don't have to be. Because what's funny is like, especially if you experience trauma, right? Like, it's a way to keep yourself safe, but then you don't need it anymore. Like, you are safe, but it's almost like the
Yeah. You
brain
outgrow
doesn't
it.
realize that you're safe.
Yeah. I think it's I think this is why chemicals like MDMA are really important for people who are experiencing trauma. It's very hard to act on trauma under the effects of something like MDMA. It's really hard to be suspicious. It just makes you very open and social. And so you have an experience where you're like, oh, I was okay. I was like safe. And I like made like instant friends with people that I'll probably never get to see again. It was at a rave or something like that. You know what I mean? But the fact is, you come away from the experience, and you're like, I don't need to be hyper vigilant all the time. I don't need
Yeah,
to be constantly scanning the public for threats and who's going to hurt me. It's actually I'm a lot safer than I think I am.
exactly.
So, yeah.
I love that. And so I did want to ask you too, like, what, like, because I want to go back kind of a little bit too to where you were talking about how like music pretty much saved you, or you feel like,
No,
what was the process of music for you, like growing up? How did that, not as much in the creating sense, but how did listening to music really help you?
oh, I mean, it made me feel seen and calm. Um, it's the sense of companionship that I felt with the music I was listening to. I mean, I can't overemphasize that. So, when I was a teenager, I gravitated towards really, the most extreme kinds of metal. I wanted
Yeah,
to listen to like just a lot of death metal. This is the '90s, right? So that kind of Florida sound death metal stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, it just made me feel so calm and centered. It was very meditative. And I think I was carrying around a lot of anger and a lot of pain. And I know, anger, pain, aggression, that sort of darkness, that is part of driving that music. So I think that when I heard other people making that sound, I did feel kind of witnessed as a person, or I felt seen in a way that I was not feeling seen otherwise. Um, I was I did have a lot of anger as a kid, and my family responded to that anger really, badly. I mean, they just, uh, my anger was like never legitimate, right? It was always disproportionate. It was always like, I had some sort of problem. I mean, I think I can, as a father now, right? I can look back and be like, anybody would have been angry growing up in the circumstances you're growing up in. That doesn't mean that they were the worst possible circumstances. And there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of privileges I had. There's a lot of comforts I had and like that. But there's also, um, emotionally, it was a pretty bereft childhood. So and there is something really validating when you have your own kids and you're pretty sure that you're not reproducing that sort of emotional deficit, and you're like, okay, I was right the whole time. you know? What do you know? So yeah, so music was this companion. I mean, I just developed a relationship. You said earlier that it's it becomes like a person in your life, and 100%, 100%. And I think when I started creating music, that relationship became deeper and more complicated. Um, because music does feel like another spouse of mine in a way. I mean, it's this thing that I'm devoted to. I'm committed, right?
Yeah.
And it's also a job right now. I mean, I have to do it. I need to make money. I mean, so that means that sometimes I'm in the studio and I'm not being super authentic. Sometimes I'm rushing in the studio, and sometimes I'm not really doing my best. But I'm just doing what I can given the constraints, because I have this whole other career and I have a family. Um, so, did I answer your question? I mean, basically, I just said music made me feel calm and seen. Right? I think that's it. I
Yeah,
think it's
no.
fine.
What I did like though is you brought up the aspect of anger. And I think that's so important for people to understand too, that anger is actually a really important driving
Yeah,
motivational factor, right? Because everybody always sees anger as like this bad thing, right? But I have to feel anger to realize that some injustice was happening in my life to begin to
yeah,
fight back. If
yeah,
I don't get angry, then I'm just taking whatever I feel like is the abuse and I'm just kind of laying down with it at that time. And so anger becomes like one of those very important aspects of life, right? Like when we first start to realize, like, hey, something's wrong here. And I should, like you said, I do have the right to be angry about this, even though,
yeah,
I did have other circumstances that were good, but I do have the right to be angry about like this aspect.
yeah,
And I think that's even more important too, to allow listeners for when I know I've heard this a lot that, oh, you shouldn't listen to that music, it's angry. But that angry music is actually being very productive to your ability to learn to fight back from like what you feel like is hurting you.
yeah. Boy, angry music. You shouldn't listen to that. Well, why not? Why shouldn't I be angry? I mean, I
Exactly.
think anybody who's making your emotions their business, telling you what emotions you should or should not be feeling, I think that person's probably engaging in some light abuse at that point. Like,
Yeah.
rather than being like, oh, are you feeling angry? Tell me about that. I mean, that's somebody being a friend, right? Like, I'm here to listen. Or, I'm angry sometimes too, sharing a moment of solidarity. But if somebody's trying to regulate your emotions, they're probably being self-interested and self-serving. That's not a very good sign. That's a red flag, I think. You know,
Exactly.
yeah. So,
That happens a lot with
stay away
parents.
from people who tell you to not listen to angry music. Those people are not they're not being your friends.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I feel like a
Yeah,
lot of times too, that happens a lot with, like, I work with a lot of like at risk teens, right? And so their parents will be like, oh, that music's too angry, don't listen to it. And I'm like, but it's actually really productive because they're taking their anger out here instead of taking it out in ways you don't want them
there's
to take it
like a
out.
super healthy and safe way to process anger, to just let yourself feel it, let it wash over you, and go from anger onto something else. You shouldn't
Yeah.
be feeling anger 24 hours a day, but you shouldn't be feeling a total absence of anger. Like a complete human being feels a lot of emotions throughout the day:
Yeah.
anger, joy, fear, excitement, boredom, all in one day. I mean, being a human being is an emotional experience. And so if you're going to have anger, I think listening to some gnarly ass angry music has got to be what are the let's just go over the alternatives. Okay, I want to process my anger. I could break things. I did a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's a problem there. I mean, when breaking things can escalate into breaking people, but also there's property damage, and but you never look good breaking stuff, right? I mean, ugh, you undermine your own your
Right.
reputation goes in the shitter when you're breaking stuff, So, I know yelling at people, blaming people, and sometimes it's appropriate to blame someone, but I think other times people engage in blaming because they're anxious or scared or angry, and they're directing that energy at someone,
Yeah.
um, to feel better in the short term. I don't. That's not a good way of doing it. I really can't think of a better way to process your anger than listening to angry music or doing angry art. Like
Right.
splatter paint, kind of. Or I think exercise is a great way to deal with anger. I've only, unfortunately, realized that recently. Now that I'm middle aged and like my body's changing, I'm like, oh my god, I have to do exercise. So,
Fair. It's fair.
know? But yeah, it's really great, and I think that there's tons of research that confirms this point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, there
It's
is.
something that people looked into. They're like, well, does angry music make people more likely to engage in harming others? And the
Yeah.
conclusion that the research has come to is absolutely not. It's the opposite.
Yeah, the same with gaming too, right? Like research
Same
has
with gaming,
actually
yeah,
found that
yeah,
gaming is actually very productive and it actually helps a lot of skills grow when
yeah.
depending on the game, I guess, but like it actually helps in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're
Uh,
engaging in problem solving. It's active. It's not passive. It's not the same as watching TV. I mean, you're actually doing
yeah.
something. And you just reminded me of I'm going to reference a study, and I don't know who the author is, but I can send it to you. But I don't want to be one of those people who are like, well, I read a study. No, I actually really did read a study. I have it on my computer.
Okay.
And the conclusion of the study was that the best way to predict whether someone would engage in homicide as an adult, who's going to kill someone else, the number one predictor was if the person didn't engage in play as a child. I
Oh,
thought
I
it was
didn't
this
know that.
fascinating article. They're like, it's not socioeconomic background. It's not even necessarily childhood abuse and trauma. It's specifically when human beings don't play, when that's not part of their identity, who they are, and how they grow up, they're much more likely to kill another human being as an adult. I was like, wow,
I did not
we
know that.
so we so misunderstand the causes of violence and harm, and our justice system doesn't have it's completely ignorant of this sort of knowledge, right? It assumes that people engage in bad decision making, and that's why they should be punished, when in point of fact it might be these sorts of environmental factors. So I'll send it to you if you're interested. I think I got the short form version of the article, but I think it links to the larger, you know
That's cool.
if you're nerdy about that stuff. I think that the number, the n was fairly large. I think it was a longitudinal study. I think it was over the course, they did it over 6 or 7 years, something like that. you know
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me because that actually is really interesting because it does show exactly how much we misunderstand things and even like sometimes when we try to make like fill gaps, right? Like of information that we're sometimes very wrong on the
yeah,
information that we innately jump to, right? So
yeah,
that's kind of
yeah,
cool. I
yeah.
have a question though for you too, like because we were talking a little bit about transmuting pain and anger and stuff. When you're in the studio and you're transmuting that, right? What is that process? Do you kind of go by what you're feeling right then, or do you have to go into a space, or what does that kind of look like for you to start transmutation to put that into your
Yeah.
music?
Well, sometimes I get into the studio and I'm not connected with myself at all, and that's a and so just that experience helps me realize I'm like, oh, I'm a little bit disassociated right now.
Yeah,
I'm not being real true to myself. I don't really know what's going on, and so I feel a little bit blank, and I'm like, I don't have any music ideas. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, JP, they're in there. You're just not connected with yourself. So sometimes I have to just kind of play around with some beats or riffs, until those connections start to form. And usually, when that happens, when the connection's made, usually I get this upwelling of um, an emotion that I don't know if we have a name for, because it is simultaneously joy and sadness.
okay.
And so it's like and it just really hits me. And I mean, I just feel choked up. I cry all the time in the studio, by the way, all the time. I have no idea what's going on or why. I'm making some song and I'm just like, it's a really,
Yeah,
really weird, but it happens all the time. I've never shared that before, but just in case anybody else is crying in the studio, you're not alone, you know? But so,
no,
yeah, once that connection's made, yeah, I get, yeah, it's joy and sadness. I feel very alive, I think, but feeling alive is not bliss. It's a lot of things, really feeling your life, happening in your
yeah,
body and in your mind and like that. It's like, well, it's feeling yourself, I guess. And I think maybe what makes that connection when I'm having a hard time, sometimes I'm already in that space and I go into the studio and things are very easy, but this is when things are a little bit more difficult. I think I'll just make some sound or some chord progression that just it does it. And it's so
yeah,
that's why I just play around and then I'll just hear this thing and um, I think that I'm having a lot of background thoughts. I mean, I think there's a lot happening upstairs, but I couldn't really tell you exactly what it is. It's almost a weird dream state, and I'm just playing around
yeah.
on the computer. Um, So there's that. That's one way it looks. Other ways I'm very. I go in the studio and I'm very conscious about the pain that I'm feeling, and what I want to transmute and what I want to create. So songs that were very conscious would be like "Reveal." That
Oh,
song was done in a day because it was just I went in and I
oh,
was like I already heard the main riff in my head. I knew exactly what the song was going to be about. Um, and so sometimes there's that where it's just pours right out of me. So I'd say it's about 50-50 between searching for the connection and then already being really connected.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I feel a lot. I just feel a lot of feelings in the studio. And maybe that's why I need to do it in a solitary way, because I think it might be, I'm not being witnessed, directly, and so I can be vulnerable. I can be like a little bit of a mess. Maybe if there's somebody else in the studio with me, I'd want to maintain some social norms, and that would stop me
yeah.
from connecting all the way. So
That's beautiful though. I like how number one, I appreciate how vulnerable you were, even like with telling me that, because that's beautiful. I love that you mentioned though that you cry in session, because like with me, I'm always trying to tell people like the only way through an emotion is to feel it, right? And a lot of times we suppress emotions so much, and it sounds like in those moments you're actually able to
yeah, yeah.
feel them and express them. Do you feel like, especially like when you're like maybe if it's past trauma or past issues, do you feel like after you feel it, does that process kind of go away? Do those feelings kind of like after you've sat with them, experienced them, does it feel like they're actually finally able to be released?
Yeah, I think when the creative process is going well in the studio, I am probably at my most content. I'm probably just um, I have very low anxiety, and my physical energy is better. I'm more present for everybody in my family. I'm just less distracted. Yeah, it makes me really, really happy. That's why I think I wanted to do it for a living. I mean, I'm just like, why would I not want to do this? Nothing else makes me feel that way. So I hear other people talk about the benefit they get um, from traveling, or like doing something new, other kinds of creativity. I mean, I hear them and I'm like, wow, I get all of that all at once from making music. And
Yeah.
it's crazy how much it does for me. It's just it doesn't can't nothing can do everything for you, but I mean, sometimes it feels like I'm like, I don't know what else I need. I think, yeah. Now, sometimes the creative process is not going well, and that can send me into a pretty big depression, because I can be like,
Okay.
oh, I'm tired. I don't have good ideas. I'm just struggling. Nothing's really sounding right or feeling right. You know what I mean? And I can be like, man, that's so draining. So
Yeah.
it's not uniformly energizing. But yeah, when it's going well, yeah, it's something I'm working through something. Now, if you said, okay, JP, so you were just in the studio and I see that you're feeling pretty good, what did you work through? I'd be like, I'm not totally sure. It takes me often years. And I usually have to re listen to the song multiple times. And then I'm like, oh, wow, um, I was really responding to something that was happening at that moment. So I don't really know how much processing I'm doing of like past traumas. I mean, I think a lot of it is like things in my life that are contemporarily difficult.
Yeah.
That um, I think I must respond to difficulties in my life with a lot of emotional suppression, right? Because I'm always like after the fact being like, oh shit, that was really, really hard. Like I was hurting really bad. But in the moment, apparently I'm sleepwalking through it and no idea. Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been a couple times I've listened to songs and I've been like, wow, 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 wow. I was hurting so bad. I had like no idea. It's actually really hard for me to hear the song because I'm like, whoa, I can't revisit that what was happening.
Yeah. Well, that it's funny because like they say that when we're going through hard times, like my son makes a joke because sometimes I'll blow up, like because I've took on too much because I didn't even realize how much emotional like stress I had took on, right? And he goes, "Well, mom, that's just because you're good at dealing with trauma. Like you're so good at dealing with the bad because the bad's always coming that you don't realize when you're feeling bad. Like like we do progressive muscle
Yeah.
relaxation, and then people don't even actually know what it feels like to have released shoulders, like relaxed shoulders.
Hmm.
Because they've never experienced it, they don't know that they're always in tension. Kind of like like with
Yeah.
our feelings, right? We don't realize when we're completely stressed and overwhelmed with emotions because we're so used to them being at this all-time
Yeah.
high.
Yeah. Yeah. My brain's been soaked in cortisol for most of my life, right? So that's like actually that's the normal condition, high
Yeah,
stress. I mean, I'm terrified to think about what that's done to my health, like just, you know.
I
So,
I agree.
yeah, really scary. Like when someone's in this, like, for decades and decades. I do, I feel as I've gotten, kind of gotten to middle age, I feel like I've been able to get past that's the work I did in my 30s, was basically like, how am I going to, I get up in the morning and I'm like hyper vigilant, and it just, I cannot live this way anymore. You know what I mean? I'm just such
Yeah.
a terrified person all the time. So, I was very, very intentionally leaning into things that I was scared of or uncomfortable, just really wide. Because my comfort zone was like this big. And it really impacted my ability to to like myself. That's what it was. I was going to
Yeah.
say it impacted my ability to be happy, but that's not so much it. So I didn't like myself. I didn't like the version of JP that had like, a comfort zone that big. You
Yeah.
ever heard somebody say, don't be your best self, be your favorite self? Like,
Yes.
who's your favorite version? I was like, who's my favorite version of JP is open minded, really like chill and down to earth, and like nice to people. And that's my favorite version of JP. That's definitely not the only version of JP. There's also JP who's like a dick and who's like short tempered. I mean, you know what I mean? I'm human, right?
Yeah.
But I needed to I wanted to, in my 30s, it was all about like, I want to graduate into my favorite self. That's what I'm going to do. I just want to be that person. I'm tired of being this other person. There was never a very authentic version of me. But JP in his 20s was like so high strung and just aggro, and I was also just painfully ignorant, man. Before I went to school, before I got a college education, I didn't know how the world worked. I did not know what was going on ever. I think maybe one of the reasons I gravitated towards the social sciences is because I just had this sense of like, sorry, my phone's ringing. I'm just gonna go turn it off. I just had this sense that I'm like, I am an ignorant person. I'm gonna figure it out. Sorry, I'll be right back.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Oh man, and it was a scam likely. So I'm
I
sorry we
made
got
it.
interrupted. I've turned my phone off. So
No, you're good.
I can't remember what the question was.
You
What were
know,
we talking
right?
about?
I remembered what it was right until you said that, and then it just went.
No.
Um, sorry, my brain just.
Yep. Same here. All it took was a phone ringing. I'm like squirrel.
Exactly. No, I hate squirrels. Well, I love squirrels. They're just beautiful little creatures, but I see them so frequently that I'm just like, oh, squirrel.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
my
So true.
mind is
Mhm.
totally squirreled. Oh, also like kind of like as you were talking about being like your favorite version of yourself, right? Like what advice do you have for those who are coming from like similar places, like in a similar kind of place that you were in? What's your advice to them to help them become that favorite version of themselves and to motivate them to know that even when odds are stacked against you, there is still a way to succeed?
Oh yeah, yeah. The forces of harm in your life. Let's just call it the oppressor. Whatever that is. It's different for everybody. You know what I mean? Never emulate that thing. You know, if the oppressor in your life, you know, says mean things to you, don't emulate that behavior. Don't say mean things to other people. You know what I mean? Just never emulate the oppressor. It just there's never if you feel like you're in some sort of hierarchy and somebody else is on top and you're at the bottom and that's really frustrating, inverting that hierarchy is not going to bring you justice or happiness. It just trying to invert things. Oh, somebody's on top, so I'm going to be on top. Just
Yeah.
like what's that guy's name? Is it Andrew Tate, that influencer?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, where I mean, he breaks my heart. That guy, he's obviously been treated like shit in his life, and the only way he knows how to respond to that is by I'm going to be the most dominant alpha male, and I'm going to abuse the shit out of everybody in my life. So he's doing that thing. He's emulating the oppressor. He's trying to beat his trauma by traumatizing others. It's just such a dead end. You know, it's not working out for Andrew Tate. It's not going to work out for anybody. It's just a dead end. Don't emulate the oppressor. I don't think I've learned very much in my life, but I feel like that one, I feel really, and whether your oppressor is in the interpersonal sphere, maybe there's an oppressor in your family, but I also mean socially, politically. You know, whatever the oppressor is doing, emulating them is never going to bring justice to the world. You know, so like you don't um, you can't overcome harm by doing harm. You know, all you end up doing is just doubling harm. You know, like I've been harmed, so I'm going to harm back. You're just great. You're just bringing more harm into the world. You know, there's
Yeah.
other things to do. So yeah, don't emulate the oppressor. Being intentional about being your favorite self, I think, is advice I wish I'd gotten a lot earlier. And like your favorite self isn't a static thing; it changes over the course of your life. But what you're saying to yourself is like, I am going to be a version of myself that I really like, because there is a version of myself that I really like, you know, and I have a choice. I can either be a version of myself that I think is awesome, or I can be a version of myself that I don't dig very much, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, typically the versions of ourselves that are driven by anxiety and fear and prejudice, and those we don't like those versions of ourselves. And so that's
Yeah.
why when you meet someone who's really committed to a kind of a prejudicial or hateful ideology, you're always dealing with someone who has terrible self-esteem. You know, they never, even if they're like, they're convinced that they're somehow building their self-esteem. It's like the reason why they're so aggressive with others is because they feel like crap about themselves. That, being able to, opening yourself up to that empathy for others, who are hateful. You're not apologizing for them. You're not saying that they don't deserve to be accountable or something like that, but you're using this incredible tool that human beings have, which is you can know what's really going on with somebody through empathy, not
Yeah.
through sympathy. Sympathy is different than empathy. Sympathy is literally feeling sorry for people. And empathy is just seeing things, trying to see things from their perspective without justifying or apologizing or legitimating the way they see the world. It's an incredibly powerful tool. So, um, and we need to have empathy for ourselves, and that can be really difficult. Practice having empathy for others. It's much easier to have empathy for others, so build up your tool set by just engaging in that intuitive, that feeling. Sometimes you can have more intentional empathy where you do some reflective listening to people. So it sounds like you're saying blah blah blah. Is that right? Oh, okay. You can just kind of like
Yeah.
get your and get your grounds that way. So yeah, I would say, yeah, I think those things will get you a long way. There's also just there's a lot in life you can't control, and so it's that's a sad thing. That's not the world that we should be living in. It's not ideal, right? We should be living in a world where we all have roughly the same starting point and equal opportunity, right? But that's not the world we're living in. And the opportunity structures that we're embedded in are totally out of our control. It's a really, really hard reality to swallow. And that just means that there's some paths that, even no matter how badly I wanted them, they probably weren't going to open up. And I know that like the way that our society copes with this reality is that we say things like you can do anything, and if you put your mind to it, and like that. But I don't think that's true. And I think that when we uncritically accept those sorts of yeah, what's the word? Oh my gosh, JP, come on, when you a nice thing to say, what is that? A platitude. That's the word I'm looking for. When we uncritically accept those platitudes, we are setting ourselves up to blame people for not achieving their goals and their desires, because we're like, well, and people can do anything. But clearly that's not true. I was born to some disadvantage, but there's a whole nother level of disadvantage that I have never experienced, right? So I was not once homeless as a child. I did not have an incarcerated parent. Um, I uh, I didn't really experience food insecurity. Now, and if I had experienced those three things alone, you know what I mean? How real? I'm going to be like a professional musician. I mean, being a professional musician is something that people with a little bit of privilege do in our society, and there's something that I had some sort of capital in my background.
Yeah.
So shoot, my laptop is running out of battery, so I'm going to leave just for a second again, so I can just get the plug. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
Oh yes. My computer's so angry right now. It's like, you're running out of battery. How dare
Plug me
you?
up.
Plug
Plug
me
me up
in now.
now.
Okay, 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 okay. It's like beeping at me. All right, I'm sorry, sorry, sorry. Boom, there we go. Okay, I'm back. All right.
I can't
Um,
see you.
did
You
I
just
go away? Oh, I did because I have this little piece of tape. There we go.
I'm like you disappeared.
Sorry, I'm back. I'm back. I'm back. So yeah, that's that. I think
Man in
that's
black. There you go. You're the man in black. Thank you.
yeah. So that's all I
um,
got. It's it's really tough to acknowledge socio-environmental disadvantage is a real thing, and then also know that there's always exceptions to those patterns. You might be one of those exceptions. People have overcome a lot more disadvantage than I've ever experienced, and probably gone farther in their life. You know what I mean? So that's not. So I'm not talking about fate. Like the where you're born is not fate, but I mean there there's a lot of forces that are pressing down on someone. So and so I just want to somehow, I don't know what the language is. I want to acknowledge those forces as being outside of people's control, and then I also don't want to tell people that they should give up on a goal or a dream. That doesn't seem right either. Have you figured out some sort of way to meet in the middle?
so kind of like what I've had to tell my because I did there were plenty of times I experienced like sleeping outside and stuff as a kid, and I grew up in foster home, and a
Oh.
lot of what you said like kind of was a challenge for me growing up. I come from a long line of like orphans, and my mom was a stripper, and she danced and she was a prostitute to kind of help make money, and I don't know who my father is, but so like I came from like a long line of disadvantage. And I think that's what makes stories about when they do come from such disadvantage so powerful, is that it does show that the path to get ahead isn't easy, but if I am determined enough, I can create a different ripple. But it takes so much
Mhm.
determination. It depends on how determined I am, right? Because I could have been perfectly happy just like working like I did originally at the hospital, but I was miserable there. But in order
Yeah.
to make some kind of difference and go back to school and kind of do the other things that I thought was kind of like what I was called to do, which was to go back and help people, it caused me to have to literally force myself against literally what I mean, from the time I was like this big and in and out of the justice system and foster care, I was told I wasn't going to be anything and that I shouldn't
Mhm.
even try, which was another reason why I said that musicians have such power over us. Not really power over us, but they make such an impact because, like, for instance, I've loved your music forever, right? And you've always created a safe world for me to heal kind of a lot of my past. But you also created this world to where it helped me realize that I could be different and I could break that mold if I
Mhm.
was determined to, even though that path wasn't as possible as I wanted it to, but it was, I could do it. And then when I spoke with you for our first meeting, for our first interview, you were like, no, I think that you have a great idea. Do it. And you
Mhm.
see, if I had have heard that from somebody that I didn't respect and I didn't feel like held that, like, you get what I'm saying? Like, it
Mhm. I
wouldn't have
do.
meant as much because I would have had a lot more problems, like, actually absorbing that in. Like, no, you can do this. Like, oh, well, you're just saying that to be nice to me. But
Yeah.
like when you were like, no, that's a good idea. Like you can do that. It allowed me to be like, you know what? I'm not, even if I am getting kind of this pushback, I can move. But it took
Yeah.
me like literally not having to heal myself enough to where I didn't care what the world was telling me. Because if I kept listening to the parasite in my mind, like what's the most dangerous thing about a parasite is that we don't know we have it. People always
Mhm.
think that it's the parasites eating at you, but no, then I go to the doctor, right? And because I'm feeling bad, and the doctor gives me antibiotics, and then I get more and more mad because I'm actively trying to heal myself, and I'm actually getting worse.
Yeah.
And so I become more and more defeated when the fact is that if I just knew that I had a parasite, I could have took the anti-parasitic and healed myself.
Right.
And
Right. Right. Exactly.
and I guess
Yeah.
what I does that make sense?
It does. No, it totally makes sense.
And I
Yeah.
guess what
Yeah, This is,
oh,
this is
sorry.
like this is a fascinating topic, right? Like trying to figure out. We live in a very inequitable society, and there's definitely a problem when someone experiencing an excess of inequity if they internalize that and they tell themselves, well, because I'm a foster kid, or because I'm this or that, it means I can't do something. Whoa, that's definitely not the place we want to go to. We don't want people telling them that story. At the same time, we want to acknowledge that these disadvantages are real,
Exactly.
and that somebody's having to, if somebody is a foster kid and if they want to get somewhere, they're essentially being asked to work twice, three times as hard to go where they're
Exactly.
going. Not, and for various reasons, not everybody, depending on their life course, not everybody can do that. I think maybe I was just thinking about when I was telling my life story, and I said, hey, I got a free ride scholarship to UW, right? I didn't have to pay. What happens if I had not gotten that service? Then everything would have been different, And
Exactly.
so maybe where I'm going with wanting to acknowledge disadvantages is real is I'm like, you know what? I want services in place to help people overcome those disadvantages. So I don't want to tell a story like, well, you can do anything despite the disadvantages, because then there's no rationale for the services.
Yeah,
So what I need,
exactly.
yeah. So I think that's where I'm going. Like, I did overcome disadvantage, but also how fucking lucky was I that
Exactly.
these things were in place and that I was the beneficiary of these things. And my whole life would have been completely different. And so I want more of those services in place. I want to expand those services. You know what? Because they I think they're life saving. So yeah, that's it.
No, I completely agree with you because like I agree because you don't want to tell people like you want to acknowledge their disadvantages because these like you said you have to I feel like to some extent like when I went to school at Sam, right? Like some of those students I feel like I had to work 12 times as hard as they did
Yeah.
to and I was definitely much more exhausted because I was trying to fight this uphill battle constantly. But like you said, without those resources, it makes it so hard, which is what made me kind of want to be an advocate to get those resources out there to let people know like if we can give people the resources, there is a chance that they can succeed. But I feel like they're so limited and then when they are given sometimes they're so abused that it makes it harder for those who really need them to even get them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not, providing public services is not easy.
Yeah,
I guess as a political scientist, I have my finger on the pulse of this a little bit, where it's there.
yeah,
You can have a great idea, but implementation, all sorts of things can happen in implementation. So they have to be implemented in a way um, that makes them work in the way that was intended, and that's hard. But just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And American culture has such an ambivalent relationship with public services, with helping people who are born to the disadvantaged circumstances that are completely outside of their control. They can't really
exactly.
do anything about it. Um, so I guess that again that might be like I avoid explicit political positions most of the
Yeah,
time. I'm not very partisan or something like that, but I guess I just probably yeah I guess I'm pretty committed to expanding public services. you know, I think there's plenty of money for it, plenty of resources. I think it's a matter of political will, and I think the stakes are high. I think actually people's lives are on the line.
yeah,
Because we get like one shot at life. It's really sad. We just get one shot, and we're going to make a bunch of mistakes along the way. I mean, um, and but people shouldn't be punished because they were born broke. Or
exactly.
or
No,
born to parents who couldn't cope, or whatever. I mean, just like that's when you say that people are just completely 100% self-responsible. They're just on their own. They have to overcome this thing. You're essentially saying, yeah, we're going to punish that person for being born to a broke, uneducated family that had to dance for a living or something, right?
yeah. Well, and kind of like even like as I said that, you kind of made me reflect on that a little bit too, is like and even at that though, even like so being a counselor, right? When I first stepped into those rooms, I did not realize how much being a trauma counselor that they were gonna rattle my own demons at that moment. Like
Yeah,
it rattled my own it rocked my shit. Like
yeah,
completely. And so I had to re-go over all this entire healing process of like so much stuff that and the injustices that I shouldn't have had to have healed. But the beauty is that, sometimes people are like, oh, that's toxic positivity. Well, no, I acknowledge the damage that was done to me and I acknowledge the pain and I've worked through it. but the fuel was there, so I had a choice. I either let that fuel drown me or I turn it into a fire and let it fuel me to make sure that other people don't go through the same injustices and to help other people, to kind of be that advocate that I felt like didn't show up for me, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. It does. I mean, there's a word for it, and I can't remember what it is, but it's 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 your approach to life is like, I'm going to try and fill the world with things that heal me, right? Like, instead of trying to like gather those things or hoard those things, I'm going to try and fill the world with those things.
Yeah,
I kind of, on the assumption that I'm not the only person who's going to heal from this, and that I'm just that, and that healing is something we do collectively and together. So
exactly. No,
I think it's a really nice way to live life. It's a nice thing to do. Like, what do I really want? I'm going to give that to the world. Whatever I really want, I'm going to try and fill the world with that. And it's like a nice relationship out of the world because it's very participatory. It's like I'm going to be actively engaged in trying to make this change by filling it up. So,
not
um,
not hard sometimes though, because every once in a while I do get like completely smacked for that, and I'm like, oh, maybe I went to a difficult place for a minute, right? But then it's like, no, no, I've got this. But I did want to tell you, I do appreciate your time, and I want to honor your time. Um, but do you have anything else that you wanted to share with us before we go?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I'd like to just say a little appreciation. I really like there. Um, I think the music I'm doing is really driven by psychological themes and awareness. I think there's like therapeutic aspects to it, and I don't really get to ever talk about that. So I just want to say I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about how, um, about how psychological it all is. I mean, that's really what's going on. So thanks for just seeing that. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it more and also think about it more. As we've been talking, I've been in my mind comes up with like questions, things that curiosities. I'm a very curious individual, and so I just do want to know more about the relationship between psychology and music. I think it's a very exciting world. I wish I was in that research. Why do I have to be in political science? Why can't I? Why did I get a PhD in psychology, man?
Well, come research with me, JP. That's
Oh, I
my research.
know, I know.
Join me in my
Yeah,
research.
totally. Yeah, I just feel like there's so much to do. So anyway, so yeah, just my way of saying thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, yeah.
And it was always lovely talking to you. It always is.
Yes.
And so,
And thank you. I appreciate you giving me a chance and rolling the dice and coming on here and speaking to me about it. I truly appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. So thank you. And thank you for all that you do. And thank you for just being the amazing, badass you.
thanks. Alrighty. I'll talk to you soon, okay?